Why are people arguing that we're losing our military superiority is a complicated one. People asked that question in the 1920s and 1930s. Why are people arguing that we're losing our military superiority? This is Steve Gibson reporting. A shout out to Tiger Logic and their production value. Recently, the Wall Street Journal has, in their op-ed section, published an article that has made the contention that we are losing our air superiority, that the United States Air Force is being degraded by comparison to the advances being made by China. And there's some contention that that's happening with the Navy as well as the overall force complement. I don't understand this. Please, by the way, remember to follow, subscribe, and like so that I can continue to make these kind of observations. We are about to be at a military budget of $1.5 trillion. That is a larger number than many significant economies of entire countries around the world. That is a $600 billion increase from prior years. Generally speaking, the United States has been spending around $900 billion a year with respect to its military. The Chinese have been spending somewhere between $250 to $300 billion a year. Now, these are actual dollar equivalents. Why in the world, when we are spending 3 times or more as much of the Chinese, would we be in any way, shape, or form falling behind? Someone needs to explain this to our current politicians in office in the Trump administration so that we can be looking at waste, fraud, and abuse with respect to our military-industrial complex. Under no circumstances should the United States in any way, shape, or form be falling behind in terms of military capability compared to the Chinese. Now, there's only one explanation for a divergence of military expenditure. We have about 1.3 million personnel active in our military, with about 800,000 reserves. China has about 2 million personnel in its military, with about 500,000 reserves. So the complement of personnel is roughly the same. Now, the reports out there are that China spends about 5, maybe 10% of what we pay our active military. Now, I would understand that, therefore, that would account for some of the divergence between the $900 billion and the $300 billion. But that can't possibly constitute more than $100 billion of expenditures in terms of a difference. That would leave, at a bare minimum, the United States currently somewhere in the neighborhood of half a trillion dollars of additional expenditures compared to China. Now, there's an understanding that China's Navy is around 850 units, and we're about 470 units in terms of ships. Now, that doesn't mean that they're qualitatively ahead of us with respect to naval capability. It merely means that they're stacking the number of ships that may very well be associated with regional level of protection or an approach towards what they're going to be doing in the future with respect to Taiwan. They may have 1 or 2 aircraft carriers. We have 11 aircraft carriers. Our aircraft carriers are vastly more substantial in size and quality, and our aircraft carrier task forces vastly are superior to anything that the Chinese can produce. But the reports are that the Chinese naval shipyards are able to scale up production and are in fact producing more on an annual basis than we are, and we're even having trouble maintaining our ships. With a $900 billion or $1.5 trillion military budget, this should not even be an issue. We should be able to clearly have a 600-ship naval force that is well maintained, increase the number of strategic ships associated with any conflict that may be happening with respect to Taiwan. We need to understand with our politicians why this dichotomy is occurring, why these reports are being made, and whether or not these reports about Chinese naval force potential superiority in the next decade is true. The folks that are running for office need to be addressing this issue. Voters need to be asking questions about this. Podcasters need to be making observations that this kind of issue should not be something the American voter should be worried about. If we're allocating this great a percentage of our tax dollars to the military-industrial complex and military expenditures, there should be no question that over the next 2 decades, nothing is going to create anything of an inferiority on the part of the United States military vis-a-vis China. Now, it appears that our Air Force, which is the focal point of the Wall Street Journal article, is in the words of that article, potentially going to be in a less than superior position with respect to a 6th-generation fighter that China is developing, and saying that our F-47 fighter may be delayed by comparison to the 6th-generation fighter that China is producing. Well, first of all, the article needs to talk about the fact that we have about 13,000 unit force in the Air Force compared to about a 3,500 unit complement with respect to China. The article also needs to address that, is this 6th generation truly 6th generation compared to the 5th generation fighter that the United States is putting out? And how long will it be before we have a 6th generation fighting complement? There needs to be a lot more investigation of these issues. How in the world is China ever going to have a superior Air Force in terms of aircraft at any level when their budget is 1/3 and potentially 1/5 of the military budget of the United States? Based upon the Iran conflict, there should be no question that the United States needs to maintain absolute air superiority. That's not only with respect to the defense of the United States, but with respect to addressing any natural resource or other national security interest issue that is outside of the United States. Now, some of you may question, why are we even spending any level of concern with respect to these issues? Is there any serious risk that the United States is going to be successfully attacked by China? Will China ever risk attacking any inch of United States territory, whether it be Hawaii, the West Coast, Guam, what have you? Would China ever risk a nuclear conflict by ever attacking an inch of the United States? Well, that question is a complicated one, People asked that question in the 1920s and 1930s, and then Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. Is it within the realm of possibility that a foreign adversary would ever attack the United States? It's within the realm of possibility. What is far more likely is that there might be a strategic move by China against either Taiwan, which threatens our semiconductor trade, or China has some adventurism in the Middle East or along the India border. Any of those eventualities potentially triggers an evaluation of the United States as to whether or not it needs to get into that conflict and address it. Now, if the United States does, it's obviously risking a nuclear war. It seems to me, though, that conventional war conflict remains a possibility, with the understanding that no one would ever use nuclear weapons under those circumstances. This is why the European Union remains so afraid of potential Russian attack on the Baltics, into Poland, or even into Germany. That if Russia did that the United States would not, under Article 5 of the NATO treaty, engage in any nuclear attack on Russia. What would more likely happen in war scenarios is that there would continue to be a conventional war conflict, and Russia might be willing to risk that if it felt that its own security was at stake, or it felt that it's a strategic approach towards the European Union was in its best interest. All of that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, as if Russia can't possibly take over the Ukraine, why it believes that it could take over Poland or Germany would be mystifying. I think the Baltic states have some concerns about whether or not Russia might try to take over the Baltic states, and the Baltic states believe that may very well be an initial level of success on the part of Russia, with the caveat that the Baltic states are now relying upon Article 5 of the NATO treaty and have all of NATO come to the aid of the Baltic states. That right now would lie principally in the hands of staging military defensive and then offensive actions from Poland and in Germany and maybe Finland. All of that basically means we're probably in World War III. What we're trying to understand as well, therefore, is that heightened conventional forces is a deterrent against other conventional attacks. The nuclear deterrent in and of itself is insufficient to deter the kind of adventurism that we're envisioning by Russia or China. Now, if Russia and China got together, Russia struck eastward against the European Union, China struck against Taiwan and potentially the South Pacific and Japan, those scenarios will need to be the subject of obviously serious conventional deterrence and defensive actions. Do the militaries of the European Union, combined with the United States on the European front, and the United States, Japan, the Philippines, and Australia serve as a sufficient conventional attack force with respect to the scenario that I've just identified? I think there should probably right now be no question that that's true, that those attacks would be foolhardy on the part of Russia and China and perhaps North Korea. They would risk a whole lot more than they would ever gain with respect to those kind of attacks. So that's the answer to the question, do we need to have a heightened conventional force with respect to the protection of the United States in and of itself? The answer to that is probably no. The course that we have maintained with respect to our military forces is more than adequate to defend against any potential attack on the United States. Given the fact that we are separated by two oceans, the notion that either China or Russia could possibly mount a serious attack in North America is folly. That having been said, the United States interests clearly go beyond North America. And there is absolutely an interest to maintain a conventional deterrent with respect to the East Asian theater and the European theater. It also means that the European Union needs to continue to be self-sufficient. No, not continue. Needs to continue to go down the path that has been instituted through the urgings of the Trump administration to become more self-sufficient, so that the United States does not have to ever come to the aid of the European Union. Hopefully, I am hopeful that the Trump administration's pulling out of about 5,000 troops from Germany is going to be a signal to the European Union that they need to support themselves when it comes to the potential military conflict with Russia. Bottom line here, folks, our politicians and officials in office need to explain to us why there is any hint of an imagination that countries like China might be gaining any level of superiority, given the fact that we are outspending them by anywhere from 3 to 5 times in any given year. Steve Gibson reporting. Once again, please remember to like, subscribe, and follow.